Okay, with the axial bone skeleton, I'm going to start with the external parts, and then I'm going to go back to the internal parts. So we're going to start with the cranial bones. We've got here the frontal bone, which covers this area here. And then I've got my two parietal bones, which are these two bones right here, the two parietal bones. Then on the back here, I have the occipital bone, and here is the external occipital protuberance. And what is that? That is the entry site for the ligamentum nuchae. And then on the side here, I have, it would be from here to here, would be the temporal bone. Okay. And going to the temporal bone, here we have, in here is the temporal mandibular joint, and then the mastoid process is here. The styloid process, which I'm going to show in a photo, but it would be here and it would kind of poke out here. This model doesn't have the styloid process. The external acoustic meatus is right here, and the squamous part of the bone is this area here, would be the squamous part of the bone. Okay. And now we're going to go to, I'm going to skip the internal view, and also we're going to go to the external view of the sphenoid. The external view of the sphenoid bone is this bone right here, which shows the greater ring, and then the orbital part is up here, and that's also the greater ring. And then we have the superior orbital fissure. So here would be the inferior. The superior orbital fissure would go in this area and kind of slit over here. And what passes through the superior orbital fissure are cranial nerves 3, 4, and 6. And now I'm going to go to, I'm going to come back to the internal part of the sphenoid and the ethmoid, and I'm going to show the sutures. So we've got the coronal suture. The coronal suture is this suture right here, and it's where the frontal and the two parietal bones meet, and that's the coronal suture. And then the sagittal suture is where the two parietal bones meet, and they make this sagittal suture here. The lambdoid suture is where the occipital bones and the two parietal bones come together, and they make this lambdoidal suture here. And then the squamous suture is where the temporal bone and the parietal bone comes together, and it would be somewhere, the squamous suture would be somewhere here. Okay, next is the facial bones. Okay, so here we have the maxilla and the alveolar process, which is where the teeth rest in the alveolar process. Here is the zygomatic bone, and together the zygomatic bone and the zygomatic arch, the zygomatic process make the zygomatic arch. The ethmoid bone in the front here would be the top part here, the perpendicular plate, and then the two superior nasal conchae would be the ethmoid bone. And then the vomer is the bottom half here, and the vomer with the perpendicular plate make the bony part of the nasal septum. The inferior nasal concha would be, here you see the superior nasal concha, the inferior nasal concha would be on both sides down here. And the mandible, here is the body of the mandible, here is the angle of the mandible. Here is the ramus. This part is the ramus of the mandible. This is the mandibular condyle. This is the mandibular notch, and this is the coronoid process. Now going to the vertebral column, we've got, I'm going to zoom out here. The vertebral column has 4 curves. So the 4 curves are the cervical, the thoracic, the lumbar, and the sacral. The primary 2 curves are the thoracic and the sacral, and the secondary curves are the cervical and the lumbar. Now the cervical vertebrae have 7 irregular bones in them. And the atlas, this is the atlas. It articulates with the occipital condyles of the skull, and it allows you to make the nodding motion of yes or no, which I'm going to demonstrate here. The yes or no movement is what it allows you to demonstrate. Okay, and on the thoracic vertebrae, oh no, I'm sorry, I'm still on the cervical vertebrae. So what's unique about the transverse processes, one, is that only the cervical vertebrae have the transverse processes, and the transverse, which make the transverse foramina, or foramen, and that's on the side here, on the side. And the other 2 vertebrae, the thoracic and the lumbar, don't have that. And what that allows is for the vertebral arteries and the vertebral brains to go, vertebral vein and vertebral arteries to go up into the skull to reach the brain. Okay, and then now we're going to go to the thoracic vertebrae. Thoracic has 12 irregular bones. Okay, and here is the spinous process. And then here is the transverse process that's sticking out here. And then in here, right here, this is the vertebral foramen right here. This little hole right here. And that allows the spinal nerves to pass through the spinal cord. And then here we have the body. This part right here is the body. And in between the 2 bodies is where the intervertebral disc rests, in between the 2 bodies. Now the lumbar vertebrae have 5 irregular bones in the lumbar vertebrae down here. And then here we have the coccyx. The sacrum. The sacrum is 5 fused bones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 fused bones is the sacrum. And then we have the coccyx right here. And then going to back up here to the sternum. So here on the sternum, we have the manubrium right here, the body right here, and then the xiphoid process here, and then the jugular notches, this little indent here. And then with the ribs, we have 7 true ribs, 5 false ribs. So the 7 true ribs, let's see here, the 7 true ribs are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 are the false ribs. These 2 are the floating ribs. And the way the ribs articulate with the vertebrae is, in this model, doesn't show it very well. But here is the head. And the head actually articulates with 2 vertebrae, both the superior and inferior costal facets that are on the 2 vertebrae here is where the head actually articulates. And then in the back here, the neck and the tubercle articulate with the transverse facet, costal facet of the vertebrae. And that's how they articulate to the vertebrae. Now, going back to the internal views that I want to go back to, and those questions here, I'm going to focus on here. All right. So here I just want to show the styloid process. My model did not really have that little thing here. That would be the styloid process. And then going back to another photo here. All right. Okay. All right, so this is where I'm going to focus on the sphenoid and the ethmoid. The sphenoid here is this area right here. And here we have the petrous part of the temporal bone, this part sticking out is the petrous part of the temporal bone. And inside of that, in the structures that are in that are the middle and internal ear cavities. And then in here, this spot right here is the internal acoustic meatus. And what passes through the internal acoustic meatus are cranial nerves 7 and 8, right here. And then now we're going to go to the internal parts of the sphenoid. So here we have the lesser wing. Then we have the greater wing, and then in here is the optic canal. And what passes through the optic canal is cranial nerves 2. And then here is the celloturcica. And the structure that is in the celloturcica is the pituitary gland that sits in the celloturcica right here. Now the ethmoid bone, the section that we can see in the ethmoid bone is this section here. And right here, okay, right here is the crista galli. And in the crista galli, it helps secure the brain in the cranial cavity. And then on each side here, we have the cibriform plates. And what passes through the cibriform plates are the filaments of the olfactory nerves. And then here we have a better, it's a drawing of the sphenoid, and that's a clearer view of the lesser wing, the greater wing. Over here would be the optic canal, the celloturcica, and then this would be the ethmoid. This would be the crista galli, and then the 2 cibriform plates.